The United States was once again at the center of a global economic whirlwind. President Donald Trump, in his bold return to the White House, had just announced a sweeping round of tariff hikes, this time targeting not only China but also select European Union countries and even some Latin American nations. The move sent shockwaves through the financial world. Wall Street wobbled, international leaders expressed concern, and media outlets were set ablaze with round-the-clock coverage. The most controversial aspect? These weren't just protective tariffs. These were retaliatory economic weapons, and no one could explain them better or defend them more fiercely than the brains behind the scenes. Enter Usha Vance, the brilliant Yale law graduate, corporate litigator, and wife of Vice President JD Vance, Trump's right-hand man and America's newest conservative icon. Usha had always been more behind the scenes, fiercely private, but tonight she would step into the limelight. Cable news titan Eric Dalton, host of the nation's top-rated nightly political program Straight Talk with Dalton, had publicly challenged Usha to join him for a one-on-one live debate about the tariff hikes. His tone was condescending. He tweeted things like, "Does Mrs. Vance even know what a tariff is? Or is she just parroting Trump's trade fairy tales? She's just a lawyer, not an economist. I'd love to see her explain these disastrous tariffs." Dalton expected a soft, unsure guest to stumble through basic macroeconomics. But he was about to find out. He invited a lioness into the ring. The studio was buzzing. Producers ran back and forth adjusting lighting, microphones, and split-screen feeds. The audience, a mix of policy wonks, political junkies, and media elites, filled the seats behind the glass. At 8 p.m. sharp, the show began. The camera panned to Eric Dalton's smug, polished face. "Good evening, America," he began, smiling as if he already knew he was going to win. "Tonight, we have a very special guest, Mrs. Usha Vance, wife of Vice President JD Vance. She's agreed to defend what many economists are calling the most dangerous trade policy in modern history." The camera switched to Usha. Calm, poised, dressed in a sleek navy blue suit, eyes steady, hands neatly clasped. She nodded politely. "Thank you for having me, Eric," she said, her voice confident but warm. Dalton dove in hard. "So let's start with this," he said, flipping through his notes theatrically. The Trump administration just slapped a 25% tariff on steel imports from Germany, Brazil, and India. Basic economics tells us this will increase costs for American manufacturers. So tell me, how is that good for the American worker? Usha smiled. Not the smile of someone unsure. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated. "Actually, Eric," she said evenly, "basic economics also tells us that when a foreign country dumps steel into our markets below production cost, it kills American jobs. The tariff levels the playing field. It restores balance, not distorts it." Dalton scoffed. "Oh, come on," he said, "are you suggesting the U.S. can win a trade war? Because that's exactly what tanked the global economy in the 1930s. Usha leaned in. "Eric, what tanked the 1930s economy was a global collapse before any tariffs were implemented. Let's not rewrite history. And let's be clear, this isn't about isolationism. It's about reciprocity. When Germany charges us 30% to sell them cars and we charge 2.5% back, who's the fool? Not Trump." The studio shifted. People were listening now. Dalton's smirk faltered slightly. But he wasn't done yet. And neither was Usha. Eric Dalton adjusted his tie, something he only did when feeling the heat. Usha Vance wasn't playing defense anymore. She had subtly taken over the debate. Eric regrouped. "Let's talk farmers, Usha," he said with more edge in his voice now. "The American agriculture sector relies on exports. With retaliatory tariffs from China and Europe, they're the ones bleeding. Are Trump's tariffs worth sacrificing the people who literally feed this country?" Usha didn't flinch. "Eric, I'm from Ohio," she said, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I know farmers. I grew up watching their hard work and their heartbreak when foreign markets undercut them unfairly. These tariffs? They're short-term pain for long-term security. Our farmers don't want handouts, they want a level field to compete." "So, you're saying farmers support being targeted by retaliatory tariffs?" he challenged, smirking again. Usha's response was sharp and measured. "I'm saying farmers understand the game better than armchair analysts. You think they haven't noticed how China manipulates commodity prices through state-backed co-ops? You think they're unaware of the WTO's failure to enforce trade fairness?" She leaned slightly forward. "This isn't a spelling bee, Eric. It's economic warfare. And if we keep fighting with pencils while others use grenades, we lose." Dalton blinked. For a second, the room fell quiet. Let me ask you this, he said, now visibly rattled. What gives you, a corporate lawyer with no background in economics, the right to speak on behalf of this administration's trade policy? There it was. The rude question that would have derailed a weaker guest. But Usha? She simply raised an eyebrow and replied, you mean besides graduating from Yale Law with honors, working on international trade litigation for over a decade, and advising the Senate Subcommittee on Emerging Markets before my husband ever ran for office? Oh, and also being married to the vice president doesn't mean I'm his spokesperson. I speak for myself. Something women in power do now, in case you missed the memo. The audience behind the glass chuckled. The Twitter feed at the bottom of the screen was lighting up. Usha Vance just body slammed Eric Dalton. Smart, fierce, and facts in her pocket. Respect. Is she running for office next? Because damn. Eric forced a grin. Okay, Usha, he said, holding back the red creeping up his neck, but let's be real. These tariff hikes have already spooked the stock market. Isn't Trump playing with fire before the global economy fully recovers post-pandemic? Usha nodded slowly, then delivered the knockout. Markets fluctuate, Eric. That's not news. What is news is how short-term panic has been prioritized over long-term sovereignty. If we're scared of temporary Wall Street jitters every time we defend American interests, maybe we should just hand over our economy to the Chinese Politburo and be done with it. The silence in the studio grew thick. Eric tried to pivot. But American consumers will pay more. Yes, Usha interrupted, her voice cutting like a scalpel. They'll pay a little more for American-made goods instead of subsidized imports built on sweatshop labor. That's called investing in ourselves. It's what smart countries do. So you're fine with inflation? He pushed, clinging on. I'm fine with integrity, she shot back. Boom. Dalton didn't even blink this time. He simply froze for a second, unsure what to say next. The director whispered in his earpiece, ratings are going through the roof. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a demolition. And Usha Vance was holding the sledgehammer. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough for Eric Dalton. He took off his earpiece and exhaled, pacing near the producer's desk. Get me more data points, he muttered to his assistant. I'm not losing this to a damn trade lawyer. Meanwhile, in her green room corner, Usha Vance calmly sipped her herbal tea. She was scrolling through her phone, retweets, comments, breaking news headlines, all carrying her name. Usha Vance trends #1 nationwide. Vice President's wife humiliates TV host with facts and fire. Is Usha the new face of Trump's economic war? The countdown for segment 3 began. The lights dimmed. The music played. And Eric Dalton tried to regain control. Welcome back to Straight Talk, he began with a forced chuckle. We're here with Usha Vance, who seems to have come loaded with more than just talking points. Usha offered a pleasant smile. That's the advantage of doing your homework. Dalton decided to change tactics. Let's move on to what some call the hidden cost of these tariffs, he said. You've said they're a necessary correction, but what about America's working-class families already stretched thin by inflation, gas prices, and mortgage rates? Isn't the Trump administration just adding more pressure to everyday Americans? Usha didn't hesitate. What's more dangerous, Eric, short-term cost increases or the long-term death of American industries? You talk about pressure, imagine being a 52-year-old steelworker laid off because Chinese firms undercut your factory by dumping cheap metal. Try explaining to him why we should wait for global consensus. Dalton tried to interrupt, but she held the floor. You know what's funny? Every time we talk about everyday Americans, we act like they're too fragile or too dumb to understand complex policies. They're not. They get it. They know when they're being sold out. The audience erupted into applause. A producer's hand flew up with the quiet sign, but it was too late. The energy in the studio had shifted. Usha wasn't just winning. She was connecting. Eric, now visibly flustered, leaned forward. But what about global alliances? We're angering Europe. We're distancing from Canada. Don't you see this as Trump sabotaging diplomacy for a quick win? Usha's voice dropped to a calm, deadly rhythm. Eric, who said trade has to be polite? You want diplomacy? We're already diplomatic. That's why we've been getting played. Diplomacy without leverage is just begging. Trump, and yes, JD too, understand that strength at the negotiation table starts with leverage. Tariffs are that leverage. But doesn't that isolate us? He shot back. No. It reminds the world we're not afraid to stand tall. There's a big difference. The screen split. On one side, Dalton sweating, fumbling with cue cards. On the other, Usha, confident, composed, sharp. And then came the moment that would go viral in minutes. Dalton smirked as if reaching for one last jab. Tell me this, Usha. If your husband wasn't vice president, would anyone care what you had to say tonight? Gasps echoed from the studio audience. Usha stared at him. Then she leaned in ever so slightly and delivered the line that would be quoted across every news channel by morning. If my husband weren't vice president, I'd probably be sitting in your chair, Eric. Only difference is I'd be doing it better. The crowd burst into cheers. Eric Dalton's face turned crimson. The Twitter ticker exploded. She ate and left no crumbs. Who is this woman and how do we elect her to something, anything? Eric Dalton just got Vanceified. And as the show neared its final segment, it was clear Usha Vance had done more than defend Trump's tariffs. She had flipped the narrative. And America was watching. The final segment began, but the tone had radically shifted. Eric Dalton, once smug and in command, now sat like a man unsure of the ground beneath him. His show was still on air, but it no longer felt like his. Usha Vance, on the other hand, looked like she could sit there another hour without breaking a sweat. Let's wrap this up, Eric began with a forced smile. The American people are watching. They've seen prices go up. They've seen the markets wobble. They've heard the critics say these tariffs are reckless. In one sentence, Usha, why should they trust this administration's economic direction? Usha took a breath. She looked directly into the camera now, not at Eric, not at the studio crew. Straight at America. Because for the first time in a generation, someone is putting you ahead of Wall Street, foreign lobbyists, and fake globalism. She let it sink in. We've outsourced our jobs, our factories, and our dignity to save pennies on a shelf. And what did we get? Broken towns, shattered families, and a dependence on nations who hate us. That stops now. The silence in the studio was almost reverent. Then Usha leaned back slightly and added, "Look, tariffs aren't sexy. They're not simple. They don't come with easy sound bites. But they are a tool, a powerful one. And President Trump is using that tool to say, enough. Enough letting Beijing dictate our supply chains. Enough letting Brussels guilt-trip us for being strong. Enough sacrificing middle-class stability on the altar of elite comfort." Even Eric, in that moment, seemed to absorb her words differently. But he wasn't done trying. So what happens next? Retaliation? Isolation? More division across the global economic stage? Usha smiled, but not condescendingly. With conviction. No. What happens next is realignment. A reset. America leading, not begging. She continued. And let me say this too, women like me, from immigrant families, understand something many in power don't. We've seen what happens when people don't stand up for their values. My parents came to this country because America stood strong. We owe it to the next generation to keep it that way. Eric blinked again, just a second too long. He knew she had pulled the rug out from under every lazy narrative the media had spun for weeks. Well, he said, flipping a pen in his fingers, this wasn't what I expected. Usha grinned. That's usually how it goes when you underestimate a woman who reads trade reports like bedtime stories. A few crew members off camera laughed softly. Even Dalton gave a reluctant smirk. The scoreboard was obvious. The studio lights dimmed as the music began to play. The segment was over. But the moment that would live on. As the credits rolled, Eric slumped in his chair, sighing into his lapel mic. That woman's a political wrecking ball, he muttered. His producer tapped him on the shoulder, eyes wide. Ratings just broke our quarter record. Usha Vance crushed the 18 to 35 demo. Twitter's melting. We have 10 booking requests already for her. Not you. Across the building, Usha walked calmly through the hallway. JD Vance had just texted her. You were electric. Trump just called me. He said your wife is better on camera than my last 3 comms directors. He wants you advising the next debate prep. Usha chuckled and typed back. I only work for coffee and respect. JD replied, he said double both. As Usha reached her car, her phone buzzed again. It was her former law school professor. Usha just watched the clip. When are you running for Senate? She paused, smiled, didn't reply. The clip of Usha Vance's mic drop moment replayed nonstop on cable news for the next 24 hours. Some ran it with admiration, others with grudging respect. But no one could ignore it. If my husband weren't vice president, I'd probably be sitting in your chair, Eric. Only difference is I'd be doing it better. That line turned into a national catchphrase. People were printing it on mugs, hats, t-shirts. On TikTok, it became a trend, young women lip-syncing her voice with captions like, when your boss mansplains your own job back to you. When the professor doubts your numbers and you're an econ major. Even Hollywood celebrities began posting supportive tweets. At Gina for America, can we just elect Usha Vance to something already? At Tatum Talks, Tariff Queen. Crown Fire. And on Capitol Hill, lawmakers, both friends and frenemies, began recalculating their political equations. In the White House, strategy rewritten. President Trump was in the Oval Office with JD Vance and Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Trump pointed to the TV screen where Usha's clip played again. She gets it. She speaks with fire but doesn't lose control. She's a natural. JD smirked. Told you. You should see her in a courtroom. She once made a World Bank exec cry during a deposition. Trump laughed and turned to Stephen. I want her front and center on the economic campaign push. Factory towns, working moms, suburban voters, we need Usha. Stephen nodded. We'll build a tour around her. Working title, America First, from the kitchen table to the global table. A few days later, Usha returned to Cincinnati. The local community center invited her to speak, not because of her fame, but because of her clarity. A room full of auto plant workers, teachers, and small business owners gathered to hear her. She didn't bring cameras. She brought stories. She talked about her father's struggle to keep his small import business alive during the late 90s trade floods. She talked about mothers budgeting groceries down to the cent while politicians in D.C. flew private to climate summits. Global trade should never cost local dignity, she said. An elderly man stood up during Q&A, holding a worn-out cap that said Steel Strong 1974. Ms. Vance, we ain't seen someone speak up like that for us in years. Don't let them shut you up. She smiled gently. Sir, they can't shut me up. I've got a son watching me now. And I want him to know you don't have to yell to be powerful. Just be right and be relentless. The room gave a standing ovation. Back in New York, Eric Dalton tried to salvage his reputation. He appeared on another show a week later. Look, I may have been too aggressive, but that's what journalism is, asking tough questions. The host, sensing his vulnerability, pushed back. But you weren't asking tough questions, Eric. You were dismissive. You tried to belittle her. And she torched you with facts and poise. Eric shifted uncomfortably. Well, live TV, you know. Things happen. But the public wasn't buying it. Ratings for straight talk began slipping. Dalton's own network issued a statement promising a more balanced tone and inclusive discourse. Meanwhile, the clip of Usha's response crossed 200 million views across platforms. Usha received a handwritten note a week later. No signature. Just a golden presidential seal on the envelope. It read, "There are moments that change narratives. And then there are moments that change history. You did both. Let's build from here." She smiled, folded the letter, and placed it beside a photo of her and JD at his swearing-in. Later that night, as she tucked her son into bed, he asked, "Mommy, did you fight the man on TV?" She kissed his forehead. "Yes, sweetie. But I didn't fight him with fists. I used truth." He blinked up at her. "That's cool. Can I do that when I grow up?" Usha looked him straight in the eyes. "You can do even more." And as she walked out of the room, the buzz of notifications started again. Networks, publishers, campaigners, even foreign policy panels, all wanting Usha Vance. But for that one quiet moment, all she heard was her son breathing, safe and strong. America had seen her. And it would never forget.